Hi, I'm Tom Knoll, President of CIMI Corporation, and I'd like to welcome you to a new information service of CIMI Corporation that has what we will say is a pithy name, One Itche. We're not going to bother to translate that because if you're easily offended, perhaps you won't like it. If you know me pretty well, then you're probably going to be unsurprised by the terminology and the phraseology. The point I'm trying to make here is that this is a no nonsense view of what's going on in tech. Everything in this series, whether it's a YouTube video like this or whether it's one of our Google Plus Hangouts, is really designed to present information without bias. The very best analysis that I can provide in the most convenient and most absorbable way that I can find, and completely without influence by third parties, vendors, anybody else. This is what I honestly believe to be true to the best of my professional ability. This particular topic today is about tech spending and how to drive it upward. And I think you're going to find that there's some very interesting differences between the perspective that I present here and what you've heard elsewhere up to now. I hope by the end of the session, you're prepared to believe what I say is true. And if you do, that you'll continue to view these features and presentations as we make them. Let's start off with the usual legalistic mumbo jumbo because we have to. I'll let you read this off the screen, but to give a quick summary, this is an information service of CIMI Corporation, and the information that's contained in this and in all of the other presentations in this series are opinion pieces. This is my opinion, Tom Knoll, as president of CIMI Corporation and industry analyst with over 30 years experience in this sector. If the opinions offend you, then please don't come back. If the opinions are something that you think is valuable, please let us know and we'll try to pick up on the positive threads and continue to deliver value for you. So with that, let us move on to our first slide. We don't really have any prep music here, so don't be concerned. Here's the question. How long has it been since we've really been happy with the rate of increase in tech spending, meaning enterprise IT and networking by service providers and enterprises? The answer probably for most of us is a long time. This is a sector that has been, for most of our lifetimes, pretty dynamic, and it seems like the dynamism has gone out of it a little bit. So the question that everybody has always asked in a situation like this is, are we about to be saved by the famous refresh cycle? Is there going to be this a massive update that suddenly occurs for some spontaneous reason? And is that then going to completely change the space of technology? And the answer, sadly, is no, we're not. But the good news is we may be able to save ourselves if we understand a little bit more about what's really going on here. So in order to find out what's really going on, we have to start with something. And what we're going to start with is the enterprise space, because this is the place where the myth is probably the most pronounced and the most clear. The refresh cycle myth really is based on the idea that users buy technology in waves at specific intervals that are basically determined by the assets that they're replacing. So every X number of years we have a desktop refresh, and every Y number of years we have a server refresh, and so forth. And it's a very attractive theory because it lends a kind of an appearance of predictability to this process. And everybody loves predictability, particularly the people on Wall Street who are trying to figure out what company stocks to buy and what company stocks to sell. But at any rate, it's this concept that's really called the refresh cycle. But there's a problem with this whole notion of refresh cycles, and the biggest one is that there's more than one cycle. If you look at the way that assets are valued and the way that assets are deployed and the way that assets are retired, what you find is that there's a number of cyclical issues that are really influencing this. Some of them are related to the financial depreciation periods that are set by government tax policies for amortization of assets. Some of them are based on basic changes in technology, operating system upgrades like going from Windows 7 to Windows 8. Some of them are determined by project payback and ROI guideline periods. But the point of it is that there's a whole bunch of these things. And because there's many of them and because the length of these cycles are different, it's extremely difficult to figure out what the net effect of any of them would be. And then finally, if you think about it, every company started at a different time. We didn't all spring into corporate existence simultaneously, start our IT buying simultaneously, and therefore slavishly follow exactly the same pattern. So even if a company had within itself some specific cyclical spending pattern, the reality is that those spending patterns would combine randomly across the base of corporations worldwide, and you wouldn't really see any substantial cyclical effect. So this whole refresh cycle thing is a myth, and we ought to stop talking about it. What would we talk about if we're not going to talk about refresh cycles? And one of the answers we think is the reality of key event drivers. This little complicated chart here shows a number of the major events in the computing age, laid out from the end of World War II until roughly the current period. And you can see on here that we have everything ranging from the invention of the transistor to the internet boom of the mid-90s. The point here is that these are really key technology events. And they're key technology events in some extent because they've had a major effect on us. So if you look at these as the basis for what might be happening in IT and IT spending, you get a completely different picture. And that picture is shown here in this productivity cycle chart. Now, frankly, I'm kind of proud of this chart. We did this first about 5 or 6 years ago. And what this represents is a graph of the rate of change of IT spending compared with the rate of change of GDP, meaning is IT spending growing faster than GDP, about the same pace as GDP, or slower than GDP? And what we've done is we've normalized this to the average value over the period since the end of World War II. And what you see here is a cyclical pattern, meaning that we can see that there have been three peaks, productivity-driven peaks, we would say, since the dawn of the IT age. And these three peaks correspond, we believe, with the new paradigms in productivity enhancement that have been applied to improve worker productivity and business value, meaning some new technology thing has come along. In the first cycle, for example, the advent of mainframe computing and batch processing, and in the most recent cycle, the advent of graphical user interfaces, the internet, and visual-based computing. And all of these things represented an opportunity to generate a whole new way of supporting workers. And when we took those opportunities up and invested in them, we created a period of time when IT spending grew more rapidly on the average than it has relative to GDP. And during the other periods when we were not adding new benefits and were therefore not able to justify new costs, we had a lower than average kind of investment. Now, if you look at the last point of the chart, the rightmost point there, you see that we had a sudden plummet in about the year 2001. And since then, we've been kind of languishing along down at about 83 or 84% of the historical norms here. And that is our current problem. That's where we have gone astray. And that's the area that we have to look at to understand how we're going to get out of our current disappointing spending interval. So the problem here is that since 2002, we've really had no new IT productivity paradigms to drive new benefits. Now, if you look at the way that companies justify costs, they justify them by saying the investment that I make in technology has got to produce a payback, and that payback has to not only cover the cost, but also create an additional kind of an opportunity premium that's based on my internal rate of return requirements. And so if we don't have any new benefits, it follows that we can't justify new investments. whatever IT spending we've already justified based on older productivity improvements, we can continue to fund, but the funding is under financial and cost pressure because there's no new benefits on the table. We're only reharnessing the same old tired things. And since people don't like to do projects that don't improve anything, the only way they can improve ROI is to cut costs. And that's put us in this current bind. So, what are we going to do to get out of it? We calculate that if we had an uptick in the IT spending growth to GDP growth ratio, that chart that you saw on the prior figure, even if we only achieved historical peak values, we could add $188 billion to IT vendor top lines over the next 7 to 8 years, or over the 7 to 8 year period of the typical cycle. So there is an enormous advantage to being able to do something about this, $188 billion advantage to be precise. And the question is, how exactly are we going to be able to harness that? What enterprises want from any new IT architecture is really summarized in these 3 points. First of all, they want multidimensional flexibility if they're a line department. What they want is they want worker customized information empowerment. They want agility in matching the way that information is presented to the specific job requirements of the worker. And they want this done in a way that's highly elastic, meaning that their costs expand and contract as their workforce expands and contracts, as their benefit case expands and contracts. They want to be able to support a kind of a BYOD friendly, empower everybody everywhere kind of an environment that takes advantage of mobile broadband. In short, they want to revolutionize the way that we deal with workers and the way that workers deal with information. Of course, what senior management wants is principally elastic resource commitments. What they're saying is that when I make an investment in IT, I'm driving a stake in the ground 5 years deep in terms of asset depreciation. And I'd really like to be able to use that 5 year depreciation of assets to my advantage in cases where I have a real predictable 5 year timeline of requirements. But in other places, I'd like to have more elastic costs to reflect the fact that I don't really have a conviction on whether I'm going to be continuing this particular expense beyond 6 months or a year, because I don't know whether it'll be justified beyond 6 months or a year. And what the IP staff wants out of this process is a consistent application platform. They're saying, okay, we love all of you guys. We love your requirements. We love the fact that you're paying the bills and paying our salaries. And we'd really like to be supportive of what you want in this whole IT business thing. But we also have our own challenge, and that is that applications have to run in a predictable way in order to be supportable and in order to be manageable in terms of cost. And so we have to have a single paradigm, a single strategy that fits across all of this multidimensional flexibility that you guys have outlined, and that gives us a way to either build applications on our own or judge applications that we purchase, so that we can be sure that the flexibility that you demand doesn't create a disorder that ends up costing us more than it saves us. So if you look at all of these things together, you're kind of forced to ask a question: could the cloud be the answer to this? Well, let's hold that question off for a minute while we look at the other side of this picture, the service providers. The service providers, the network operators. This is a group of people who are just crucial for the enterprise, for the consumer, for the binding together of what we visualize as the technology framework of the future. Everybody understands that the thing that's different about technology today versus technology of 20 or 30 years ago is that technology today is almost totally network coupled. And if technology is network coupled, then the network and the health of the network operators is pretty significant. We know that network operators have had some challenges, and the question is whether those challenges now can be resolved and whether we can drive the network in the direction that we would like the network to go by making that direction profitable and effective for the operators. There's some myths here too, and the big myth here is that broadband and mobile are driving higher profits for the operators, and so the operators don't really have a problem to start off with. If you take a look at the numbers and if you look at the financials of the operators very carefully, you'll see that that's really not true. There is a popular myth that says that broadband and mobile are driving profits and that that's going to lead to cheaper services, in fact, over time. But immediately, one of the things that you see is that revenue per bit is falling at about 50% per year, which means the basic services of transport and connection are not nearly as profitable for operators as they were even 2 or 3 years ago. And the biggest problem that we have here is that in the mobile space, where we've been able to, up to now, kind of contain and sustain the average revenue per user or ARPU, all of the projections now say that ARPU is going to begin to taper off and then decline by around 2013. And traffic from all of the things that we'd like to be able to do with broadband online, whether we're consumers or workers, is continuing to grow. And if you look at the underlying financial details of the operators, you find that channelized TV delivery is really the thing that's creating profit for the local loop. That wireline providers who are able to provide channelized television services over their infrastructure are generally able to keep their broadband loops profitable. But it's not the broadband that's doing it; it's the television. And on the mobile side, the fact of the matter is that here we are coming to an ARPU cliff sometime after 2013, and we don't really have a clue at this point what we're going to do to offset that change. And yet we're becoming more dependent on mobile every day. Well, the reality here is that it's higher layer services that drive profit and not broadband and not mobile. Broadband and mobile are just mechanisms for delivering stuff. It's the stuff that gets delivered that's important to us. The internet has changed networking from the process of connecting people, which made the network valuable, to the process of connecting people to the experience, which makes the experience valuable. The reason why we go on the internet is not to consume bits. We go on the internet to do something or find something or listen to something or watch something. The next thing is that the all-you-can-eat pricing model of the internet kind of lets you get on the information superhighway by paying one toll, and then you can go as far as you want, carry as much as you like, and it doesn't cost any more for you to do that. Well, sadly, it costs the operator more. And so that's the problem that's been making revenue per bit go down, because as the operator has to increase capacity in order to sustain some kind of a reasonable internet experience, given the increased amount of stuff that we want to do online, the operator's forced to do that at essentially no incremental revenue. We pay the same every month for internet services. And obviously, eventually, what this is going to do is force into usage pricing, because what has happened is that because incremental usage doesn't cost anything, it's encouraged the business model that we call the over-the-top model. The over-the-top model basically says, if I had a trucking company that delivered stuff for free, shipping things would be a good thing for me to do because it wouldn't cost me anything. So if I have a service provider who carries stuff that's incrementally zero cost, then it makes sense for me to try to deliver over that rather than to do something that I might have to incur real delivery costs on my own if I were to do another way. So it's this kind of OTT arbitrage that has actually encouraged new applications, new value propositions, but has done what the operators call disintermediation, meaning it's disconnected them from this service value proposition that's driving profits and revenue growth for other people. Well, the operators have realized that the road to continued profit and revenue is going to come out of these services. It's not going to come out of pushing bits around. And they don't want to be sidelined into nothing more than an experienced delivery company while everybody else is really enjoying the service revolution. So they're looking to be service providers in a real sense, and they really need to be. Operators, as it turns out, have come up with three basic things that they think really drive their future monetization, meaning the growth of profits and the growth of revenues. The most obvious of these targets is content, because video entertainment is the number one thing that consumers want. It's already the largest source of traffic on the internet. It's also the largest source of problems in terms of driving down revenue per bit, because we keep thinking of new ways of getting streaming video delivered to us. We keep thinking of new ways of embedding video on web pages for commercial purposes. We keep thinking of new content and rich media experiences. And all of these things have the effect of driving up network capacity, but again, not necessarily driving up network revenue. And so operators would really love to make video pay. And they've started video content projects about 2.5 to 3 years ago with great enthusiasm and earnestness. And 3/4 of these projects are behind schedule, and over half of them are, for all practical purposes, nowhere at this point. No progress has been made. And the reason is because the operators just haven't been able to figure out what kind of an architecture would build a value proposition for the network operator above the bit. Second obvious target is the mobile broadband human behavior symbiosis. The most revolutionary thing that has happened with the internet is not the internet per se, it's really the mobile internet. And the reason that's revolutionary is because we can't really depend and wrap our lives around something that we can experience only if we sit at our desks or sit in a living room or something like that. We need something that we can take with us, that we can immerse ourselves in no matter where we are, no matter what we're doing. And that thing then can become a partner to us in the way that we live. And our behavior will change because of the capabilities of that partner. We'll build a different way of living because we have different tools to build with and a different starting point to build from. And so this could be one of the largest areas of opportunity. And one would think that the mobile operators, who are, after all, supplying the equipment that's necessary for this experience, supplying the service that's necessary for this experience, would be the kingpin players in this. But the fact of the matter is that this area is even further behind than content is. Virtually no operator has made astonishingly good progress. And in fact, only about 10% of operators believe that they've made satisfactory progress in monetizing this mobile behavioral symbiosis. And then we come to the cloud. The cloud was a final revenue target for the operators because the cloud computing craze kind of came along at just about the same time as all these monetization concerns came along. And it's not surprising that the operator would see the cloud as a potential opportunity for them. And they have, and they've jumped on the cloud, but they never saw it as big an opportunity as either content or mobile. The one thing that's interesting is that the cloud may not have been as big, but it's turned out to be a lot easier. While the operators don't really understand how to do content monetization, they don't understand how to do mobile behavioral monetization, they do understand how to do cloud computing. And so operators have jumped into this, and cloud computing projects are way ahead of schedule, meaning that they've moved faster than expected, and faster, in fact, than any of the other projects. And furthermore, it turns out that the cloud has become an element in many of these other projects, and a disproportionately large number of the content and mobile projects that have advanced have cloud components. And that suggests that the cloud is actually instrumental in moving these other projects forward. So you can make an argument here that the cloud has created for the service provider an IT architecture. And if it has, that's an important framework. It's a starting point. But what is it that it's created? What we want to say here is that if you're getting the idea that the cloud is going to answer all of our problems and all of our questions, we're going to say that that's yes, it's true, it will. However, we want to say that this is not about cloud washing. And it's not about cloud washing, and that we're not going to cloud wash something here. I'm not going to feed you BS and an information service that's called an AHA. What we're going to do is we're going to tell you what the cloud really needs to be. And it has to be the right cloud. The right cloud, as it turns out, is not the cloud that we're talking about in the marketplace. This is not about Amazon versus Rackspace. This is not about IaaS versus PaaS. It's not about public versus private. We have to look at the cloud differently. We see the cloud today as purely a cost-saving strategy. A cost-saving strategy drives consolidation, commoditization, not growth. If we fall into cloud computing in the model that people advocate today, we're going to contract this industry and not expand it. And that's the truth, because you can't do anything else with a cost-saving model other than make things less costly. And you can't make things less costly unless you spend less. So we have to look at a different kind of a cloud. The cloud that meets both the enterprise and service provider goals has got to be a new multidimensional IT and service architecture. It's got to be something that isn't the network, isn't IT. It redefines both the network, the internet, and information technology into something where online services and applications are the same thing, where workers and consumers are the same thing, where OTT players and network operators are the same thing, just playing a slightly different role. And our argument is that we can see the shape of that cloud emerging today in some of the standards, in some of the innovations, from some of the vendors, in some of the announcements. But right now it's more in theory, in pieces. And we need it as one single glorious ecosystem that everybody can understand and everybody can participate in. And if we can make it into that, we can change the online world forever. And we can turn around the spending issues that we've had in both the enterprise and the service provider space, because we can create benefits that'll justify the costs. Now, we can't make this piece of infinite length, and so we're going to stop here and we're going to ask you, as our listeners, to do two things. First of all, we want you to tune into another section here that we've called the Revolution of Cloud Computing, where we're going to talk about the specific drivers, the specific architectures, and so forth. But we also want you to try to participate in some way in this process. Too much information is a one-way flow where I'm doing what I'm doing now, which is talking to you, and you're doing what you're doing now, which is listening. It should be a two-way flow. So we're trying to set up some Google Plus Hangouts to provide a mechanism for actually participating in discussions on a topic like this. And if you're interested in participating in, even if you want to just listen to a discussion that other people participate in, please drop us an email at hangmeout@cimicorp.com. Let me know what you're interested in participating in, whether you want to listen or whether you want to talk, and we'll work through the process of vetting you and putting something together. This is a new kind of information dissemination that I'm experimenting with here, and I need your help in showing me what works, what doesn't, and then helping to make the stuff that doesn't more valuable and more useful to you. So please participate, and thank you for what you've done so far. This is Tom Knoll.